So to talk about the national budget, the table that you had, Matthew, was interesting because it showed a couple of spikes in spending in Moçmabic to the health sector. There's been a decrease in recent years. From 2008, it was 11%. 2010 is 8%. The budget for 2011 looks like it's down to 7%. As donors, take on that hat, and also in the context of the swap, we're concerned at the message that that's sending. Government is decreasing its allocation. Meanwhile, they're still out making international commitments. The Abuja commitment, or the Abuja target, the meetings in Kampala earlier this year as well. Moçambique has signed on to, or made a number of international commitments that they are going to increase their national allocations and spending on health. However, we aren't seeing that translated into the national budgeting and the national budgeting system. The rationale that they give, we come at this very directly through the swap. And the rationale they give is that there are competing priorities. And in a country where priorities are many and resources are few, you have to make difficult political and policy decisions. And those policy decisions right now seem to be landing in the education sector and in infrastructure, which you can also contribute to the health sector. However, we're concerned. And ultimately, I think that the high volume of external funds for the health sector, there's confidence there that it's going to continue, that the donors in the health sector are not going to pull out and run away. And that has to influence how they make decisions. That's the national budget. Moving on to the sector budget support. As I mentioned, it used to be a common fund. As of 2008, it is sector budget support. Some of the funds, there are actually two mechanisms in one. Some of the funds are coded as internal, which means they disappear into state resources. We don't see them, they're fully fungible. The European Union and DFID are the donors who want their money to be that flexible. The other 12 of us have our funds that can be spent on anything, but we want them directly attributed to the sector, 100%. And that the division between having two mechanisms in one is creating a few problems. We're working it out, I think, or trying to. As a mechanism, it's fully aligned with national systems. It comes in through the Ministry of Finance into a single treasury account. It's managed with the National Financial Management Package. Reporting is then done it relies fully on national reports, so the budget execution reports that are produced for the Ministry of Finance are the same thing that we get. There are no separate reports that we as sector budget support donors ask of the Ministry of Health. The independent audit body in Moçambique, known as the Tribunal Administrativo, they are responsible for audits on the health sector. That's been problematic because they haven't been able to keep up to the commitment, the timeline that they've committed to audits. And in the short term, we are then contracting independent audits by private companies. But the idea is that there's one plan, there's one budget, there's one performance framework for the sector, and it's all based on national systems. I think probably the most, the thing that ProSeg donors would be most proud of is that we should be very, very predictable. There are no triggers for disbursement at all. In every year, we agree on performance. There's an annual sector review. I'll come to it a bit more. We agree on performance, we make commitments, and once you make that commitment, you have to release your money when we spend it, unless there's some massive corruption scandal. But the idea that, in light of our commitments to Paris, we want to create a mechanism that is based on national systems, that is as predictable as possible. The fact that there are no triggers is a significant shift. It's also difficult. I take off my swap hat and put on my donor hat. It's difficult for donors to adhere to that at times, for some of the reasons that were discussed this morning. A quick overview on projects, vertical funds, and private foundations. Because so much is off budget, it's difficult to know everything that's there, but there's an estimated 185 projects in the sector. If you think of that, that's 185 different reports, different monitoring frameworks, different bank accounts, probably, and different implementation plans. I can hardly manage my 3 bank accounts. I'm not sure how I would do with 185. There are many partners, many implementing agencies. There are almost 30 members of the Health Swap, I would say, as organizations. I'm not sure how many civil society organizations are active in Mozambique, but they're numerous. It's difficult to achieve coherence and ensure coordination. People try, but it's difficult. Information is often difficult to obtain. Predictability is almost non-existent because disbursement patterns are, vary. You have big vertical funds like the Global Fund, who says, yes, in 2009 we should be dispersing $75 million, and then none comes. What do you do with that when you're trying to deliver a national health service? It's an impossible situation. The management framework is separate from normal business, and it takes very special efforts to coordinate between government and also between partners. So it's a very complex environment in the health sector. I'll just say just a few reflections. The characteristics: a heavy dependence on external funds, highly fragmented, complex management framework, and the majority of financing is outside of national budgets or plans. And I think this is why I'm here, perhaps, to talk about then what we do with this. Because we're making an effort to do something. And this, I would say, the primary mechanism is through a national health swap. They exist everywhere, but the swap in Mozambique has existed for a bit longer than in many other countries. It's been sort of existed in the late 90s, but was formalized in 2003. There's a code of conduct. There's a memorandum of understanding. It's called the Health Partners Group, which is basically the swap group. And there's terms of reference for that group that have been jointly developed with the Ministry of Health and partners. And then there's a series of working groups, which currently undergoing an existential crisis, I think, trying to figure out why all the working groups exist and what we do. And they've kind of been divided into 2 streams: those groups which are aimed at coordination, and those which provide more technical inputs to the work that's going on at the Ministry of Health. The swap itself will be focused, in the areas of coordination, communication, monitoring. Very much what happens, I think, is still tell us what you want to hear, and we'll tell you, as was mentioned this morning. I think partners have a good relationship with the Ministry of Health. It's difficult, though. And everyone, coordination-wise, all partners around the table. The health swap meetings involve all donors. I think there's over 90 people on the email list, i.e. even people who aren't based in Mozambique, like the Global Fund, are on that mailing list. We talk to each other. The U.S. government is very active. I think they have some really good people at the mission in Mozambique who are really making efforts to share information, to try and coordinate, but they're bound by their own regulations. So it doesn't matter how people fund, they're there. Civil society is part of the swap as well, largely represented by networks of NGOs. So you'll find that while there are 20 donors, there's one representative from each of the civil society networks. And that probably needs to change, because accountability is very much from government to donors, regardless of how they fund. Perhaps to NGOs or civil society groups, but we haven't yet made the link of accountability from government to its citizens and the users of the health service. And that's something that the swap hasn't gotten to yet, but obviously we need to. And we need to figure out where we can have influence in making that happen.